The story begins with the protagonist, Attilian Cumberland, lying under a tree recalling a beautiful white snake that had once come to place a stone. This was where everything had started. A boy approached, calling out to Cumberland and announcing that they had finally found him, though he was still asleep. Cumberland asked what the boy was yelling about as it was disturbing his meditation. The boy then mentioned that a few bad people had surrounded the mansion and were threatening the master. Cumberland was shocked and wondered who was troubling his grandfather. The scene shifted to the mansion where a boy stood wondering who the intruders were and why they were trespassing on Attilian's land. A man on horseback asked an elderly man if he was Aiden, the one in charge. The old man confirmed his identity as Aiden and asked why they had come. The man showed a paper and introduced himself as Orlando from the Motion family, claiming to have come to take over the territory on behalf of his family. Aiden, visibly surprised, replied that this was the domain of Attilian Byrne, the mage, and that Orlando had no right to make such demands. Orlando replied that Byrne had died in the Snow Demon Ridge 16 years ago. He then showed a promissory note signed by Byrne before his death, stating that the unpaid debt would be covered by the territory as collateral. Adon was taken aback and insisted that it couldn't be true, claiming he would request a court to verify the document. In response, Orlando kicked him with his horse, calling him an ignorant fool and telling him to get lost, adding that as an apprentice mage, the court had no authority over him. Just then, Cumberland stepped in between them, stopping the horse and demanding to know who had given them the right to act recklessly. He punched the horse, making it fall, and the creature was killed in the process. Orlando jumped off his horse and stood, asking who Cumberland was. Cumberland instructed Faye, the boy, to take Grandpa Aiden to a safe place. Faye agreed, and Aiden warned him to be careful. At that moment, Orlando realized that it was Cumlin, the son of Mage Byrne. He'd heard rumors that Cumlin was a magicless waste, just a brute. He couldn't believe such a person would dare attack an apprentice mage, so he decided to teach Cumlin the rules of the world. Cumberland, unfazed, responded that he was eager to see what magic truly looked like. Orlando then raised his staff and unleashed a resounding flash of magic aimed directly at Cumberland's chest. Faye and Aiden were both worried about Cumberland. He had fallen back after Orlando's attack, and Orlando smirked at the sight. The others watching were shocked, recognizing that it was the legendary magic in action. Orlando coldly remarked that this was the price of offending a mage. Faye, deeply concerned, wanted to help Cumberland, but Aiden stopped him. Cumberland, however, slowly rose to his feet and said that he now understood. The pain was indeed intense. Orlando and his followers were taken aback by Cumberland's resilience. Cumberland continued, revealing that he had only used about 60 or 70% of his full power when the attack hit. Faye was relieved, glad to see that Cumberland was still okay. Cumberland then stood up completely and remarked, with such a weak body, it's no surprise Orlando could only produce such a weak effect. The magic itself was extraordinary, but given Orlando's level, he should leave now. Orlando, now visibly angry, called Cumberland weak and dared to blast gain magic. He swore Cumberland would die for this insult. As he prepared to strike again, Cumberland moved with lightning speed, closing the distance and landing a brutal punch to Orlando's head, slamming him to the ground. One of Orlando's followers, a mage, attacked Cumberland with magic in an attempt to defend his master. The spell struck Cumberland, sending him crashing into a nearby wall, causing him to spit out blood. Aiden and Faye watched in shock at the scene. The mage who had attacked Cumberland quickly began healing Orlando with a spell, then turned to the others, demanding why she was just standing there. Bring the medical kit. They nodded and quickly went to fetch it. The mage asked Orlando how he was feeling now. Orlando coughed and the mage understood that he had finally been saved. Meanwhile, Aiden began to collapse, but Cumberland, still on the ground, wondered what had just happened. Was that really the power of magic? The mage uncovered his head and explained that it wasn't just the body that mattered, but the vast sea of power hidden within it. Cumberland fell to the ground, his thoughts drifting to his grandfather, hoping he would wake up. Facing Cumberland still alive, reassured Aiden that he wasn't dead yet. The mage then remarked that this was supposed to be a simple handover of the territory and that they had no intention of being forced to terminate anyone. Cumberland, now fully aware, asked who the mage was. The mage introduced himself as Nexon's aide and told Cumberland to prepare himself for the road ahead. Cumberland contemplated Nexon's words, recognizing that this was the true measure of magic. Just then, Nexon prepared to attack with a flame burst. Cumberland, determined, joined his hands to block it, much to Aiden's shock. Nexon smirked, wondering if Cumberland was a fool to think he could defend against such powerful magic in such a ridiculous stance. Cumberland, however, absorbed the attack with his hands, though the force of it sent him crashing into the wall. Despite the pain, he refused to give up. After the enormous explosion, Cumberland, though severely injured, stood up and declared, "Now it's his turn." Nexon was shocked to see that there was truly someone who could resist spells with nothing more than their mortal body. He scoffed, remarking that such foolish behavior was as good as sending someone to their death. With that, he unleashed an ultimate flame burst. However, Cumberland leaped into the air countering the attack and declaring that he had already mastered most of Nexon's techniques. Nexon quickly raised a shield around himself, but Cumberland planted his foot firmly on it without budging, leaving Nexon in shock. Cumberland wondered what kind of magic Nexon was using as he couldn't even step through the shield. Nexon then launched a flame flash, hitting Cumberland and sending him crashing into the wall once again. However, Nexon noticed a scratch on his own face, something he hadn't expected. Cumberland, still trembling slightly, defiantly stated that Nexon's moves were useless against him. He admitted that the pain was intense but also acknowledged that the mage was far more terrifying than he had imagined, with his strange tricks being difficult to defend against. Nexon, confused and intrigued, wondered if human muscles could even achieve such strength. He asked himself if there were any rumors about this. Aiden, seeing Cumberland struggling, urged him to give up and surrender the territory. But Cumberland, still determined, reassured Aiden not to worry as he had found a way to defeat Nexon. Orlando, finding it hard to speak, called out to his teacher, Nexon, urging him to spare no mercy and to make sure they all died. Nexon, turning to Orlando, told him not to worry. He would make the Motion family pay for what they had done, especially for how they had hurt him. Nexon realized that the rumors were true and that Cumberland could not be left alive. Cumberland, determined to strike first and prevent Nexon from casting any more spells, rushed forward with the mindset that strength would be his key advantage. He attacked with a flurry of punches, aiming to overwhelm Nexon before he could react. Nexon, however, calmly created a magical shield to defend himself, acknowledging Cumberland's attack. But Cumberland, undeterred, smashed through the shield with a defiant declaration that he would kill Nexon. Nexon scoffed, calling him a fool, explaining that brute force could never break through his magical barrier. The onlookers were stunned by Cumberland's resilience and began to cheer him on, urging him to defeat Nexon. Nexon, clearly angered, prepared to retaliate. He told Cumberland that he had been too lenient, allowing him to entertain the thought of opposing a mage, and now the farce would end. He began chanting his spell, and Orlando realized it was a secret magic. He quickly ordered the others to kill anyone supporting Cumberland. As the chain of magic was released toward Orlando and wrapped around his head, Cumberland swiftly grabbed Orlando, tossing him toward Nexon. In response, Nexon stopped chanting, grabbing Orlando mid-air. At the same time, Cumberland rushed forward and landed a brutal punch directly into Nexon's chest. But to everyone's shock, Nexon was still chanting despite the blow. Seeing this, Cumberland quickly grabbed the magical chain and wrapped it around Nexon's neck, declaring that he would interrupt Nexon's spell. Nexon was writhing in pain, and Cumberland realized just how dangerous mags truly were. He couldn't afford to slack off for even a moment. Tightening his grip, Cumberland made Nexon scream in agony. Orlando, witnessing this, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Cumberland was actually defeating his master, the elemental mage, with nothing but brute force. He pleaded for Cumberland to stop, warning that attacking a mage as a mortal would lead to the extermination of his clan. He asked if Cumberland was willing to risk his entire clan's destruction. Cumberland, however, ignored Orlando completely. Frustrated, Orlando ordered his followers to help Nexon. As they moved forward, local residents stepped in, telling them to stop and warning that if they came any closer, they would all be beaten up. Nexon, though in immense pain, thought to himself that he only needed a few more moments before he could complete his ultimate technique. Cumberland, still holding Nexon, reflected on what he had just said. He wondered aloud if Nexon as a mage had ever considered showing mercy when committing violence or whether he had ever thought that taking innocent lives might provoke retaliation. Cumberland then told him, "Go ahead and die." In a final desperate attempt to retaliate, Nexon activated the soul-locking wheel, a dangerous spell that wrapped around Cumberland's neck. Cumberland screamed in defiance, projecting the possibility of mercy. With one final brutal twist, Cumberland tightened his grip so hard that Nexon's head was severed from his body, leaving everyone in stunned silence. A visible mark remained at Nexon's neck, evidence of the magic he had used. Cumberland released the lifeless body, standing tall. He referred to himself as the executioner of mags, coldly walking away from the scene. Upon seeing the situation, the people of Orlando surrendered to Cumberland, claiming they were merely mercenaries hired by Orlando and had no involvement in the conflict. They pleaded for their lives. In response, Orlando angrily demanded if they thought betraying him would absolve them of responsibility. He told them they didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. There was no hope for them. Everyone present would surely die. He also reminded them of the severe punishment that the magical alliances impose on those who disrespected mags. The local people, referring to Cumberland as the young master, asked what they should do. A man from the watchtower called out to Cumberland, informing him that someone was approaching from the distance. Everyone watched as a girl riding a black horse arrived, commenting that it seemed she was a little late. Orlando noticed the emblem of the Rhine Academy around her neck and asked if she was an apprentice mage, hoping she might spare his life. The girl introduced herself as an apprentice mage from the Mosin clan and informed Orlando that the villagers and traders had committed the grave crime of killing a mage and betraying their master. They would all be subjected to the punishment of both the kingdom and the Mage Alliance. She also mentioned that Orlando's family had offered a reward for her assistance, but she was unfazed by it, knowing the consequences for those who defied the magical laws. The girl urged him to head to Cumberland, noting that he seemed injured. She introduced herself as Isabella, a 16-year-old fiancée of Cumberland. She asked how he had gotten hurt. He placed a hand on his shoulder, telling her it had been a long time since they last met and reassured her that the wounds were superficial. Nothing serious. She gently touched his face, expressing her sympathy, saying it was a pity he had injured him so badly. However, she reminded him that killing a mage was a grave crime, and considering that, she suggested they silence everyone and then elope to live a life on the run. The others were terrified by her words and quickly pleaded for her to calm down, insisting they were surrendering. Cumberland told Isabella that it wasn't necessary. Things hadn't yet reached the point of no return. Even if they captured these people now, it would bring an unbearable disaster to the people of the territory. He couldn't abandon everyone by leaving, nor could he involve her and her family in that. They all just stared at him as he continued, explaining that there was still a way to resolve this. The kingdom's triennial Mage Apprentice Grand Examination was about to begin. He decided that he would enter the competition and settle the conflict through a mage duel. Faye commented that if it was a duel between mags, the nature of the conflict would change. Aiden hesitated, absorbing Cumberland's words. Orlando wondered if Nexon was an idiot. After all, wasn't he the famous muggle with no magical aptitude? That was likely the reason the gaming faction had sent Orlando to seize the property. Cumberland, however, responded that he believed where there's a will, there's a way. Becoming a sage had been his goal since childhood, and he had trained for many years to achieve it. He was determined to become a sage no matter what. Though others were shocked by his determination, Isabella firmly believed in him. She expressed confidence in her brother's words, saying that he would surely achieve his goal. Faye too had unwavering faith in Cumberland, stating that he was invincible. The others also showed their trust in him. Orlando, however, was stunned by this show of support. He wondered if they had all gone mad. After all, none of them were human magical beings. What was the point of trying so hard? Cumberland turned to the men with Orlando, instructing them to take Orlando and leave. He then told them to inform the Mosin clan that Cumberland could defeat a mage with his fist and was confident that he could destroy a third-rate family. The group was terrified, and one man quickly lifted Orlando to leave, even thanking Cumberland for sparing their lives. Cumberland's thoughts turned inward as he reflected on his past. He remembered a time in the forest when a group of children had gathered stones. One of them mentioned that he had heard Cumberland's mother was a snake demon and another child called Cumberland, the child of the snake demon. The children referred to Cumberland as a monster, telling him to stay away and throwing stones at him. At the time, Cumberland was only 7 years old. Angered by their cruelty, he punched one of the boys and shouted at them not to speak ill of his mother, warning that he would smash the boy's mouth. The others were shocked, whispering that Cumberland was about to kill someone. Still, they called him the demon's child, and Cumberland continued to punch the boy, insisting they stop saying such things. Since childhood, Cumberland had been plagued by the rumor that he was the child of a snake demon. He believed this was because his parents had left him shortly after his birth. As his grandfather carried him on his back, Cumberland asked if he really was the child of a demon. His grandfather dismissed it as nonsense, reassuring him that Cumberland's parents were extraordinary people. When Cumberland pressed him, asking why his parents had left, his grandfather replied that they had no other choice. Years later, Cumberland encountered a peculiar mage from the east, a bald man whom Cumberland immediately insulted. He asked if the man wanted a beating, insisting that just because he was a child didn't mean he couldn't take on the mage. The bald man calmly responded that Cumberland should not be angry. He explained that he was only a monk and did not tell lies, stating that everything he saw was witnessed with his own eyes. Cumberland, enraged, wondered how the man dared to speak such nonsense. The man told Cumberland that in the distant east, there was a city built by mags, Carrion City, also known as the Mage capital. At the center of the capital stood a majestic tower called the Rafer Tower. Beneath Rafer Tower in Lyrian City, a snake demon that had been cultivating for 1,000 years was suppressed. It was said that the offspring of this demon raised by human hands lived in the Cloudmarch continent. Surprised, asked what the man was talking about. The man explained that these were merely rumors, but then he asked, why couldn't Cumberland, the child of a genius mage, practice the magic of this world? Cumberland, confused and a little defensive, wondered how the man knew that he couldn't practice magic. He dismissed it as nonsense, thinking that perhaps the man was mocking him. The man, sensing Cumberland's frustration, suggested that if Cumberland was truly interested in his heritage, he should explore it for himself. From that moment, Cumberland understood one crucial thing. In a world where mags were revered in order to prove himself to his loved ones, clarify his heritage, and roam freely, he needed to become a mage. With this realization, Kunlun made a decision. He would live alongside his fiancée, who was with him on horseback, and together, they would travel to Lyrian City, a place built around a prestigious mage academy. Kunlun understood that in the world of the Cloud Marsh continent, magic was omnipotent. All authority, nobility, and armies relied on mags to provide strength and support. Mags were produced and trained by the 4 major magic academies. Isabella took him to the Lyrian Hyde Magic Academy, where Kunlun learned that the Mage Apprentice exam was held only once every 3 years, and his timing was perfect. He realized that most of the so-called apprentice candidates had already mastered a fair amount of basic magic, and there was no shortage of outstanding talents among them. Some candidates were even practitioners of dark and secretive professions. For them, becoming a mage apprentice was a means to cleanse their identities. However, the pass rate for the major apprentice exam remained extremely low. This was because the standards for the exam were incredibly strict, and the entire process was divided into 4 rounds. The first round was a written exam on magical knowledge. The large number of students were taking the exam, and the examiners often found that there was always one unusual candidate in every batch. This time, that candidate was Cumberland, whose heavy physique clearly made him more suited to be a heavily armored knight rather than a mage. Cumberland simply looked at the examiner. As he stood up, the examiner asked what he was doing. Cumberland walked closer and said he was handing in his paper. The examiner told him to just place it down and go to the hall to wait for the results. As Cumberland left, the examiner thought to himself that Cumberland had quite imposing presence. He also handed in the paper so quickly. Did he even answer the questions? After a while, the bell rang, startling everyone. They wondered what was going on. Lamina, one of the examiners, told them to head to the hall for those who had completed their exams as the announcement wall began to reveal something. Some students wondered if the bell was the Song of Wisdom, while others speculated that it was the Song of Wisdom bell, a rare occurrence that broke all previous exam records. The students eagerly awaited the announcement of the first place winner, speculating who it might be. The announcement wall displayed sacred glyph text, which confused many of the students. They couldn't even read the ranking list, leading some to believe that their magical literacy was insufficient. One student who had been taking exams for 9 years commented that he had never heard the bell ring like that before. Finally, the first place winner was announced. It was Kunlun. The hall erupted with exclamations of disbelief. It was really Kunlun, and he had broken the written exam record. Cumberland was completely surprised, though he muttered that it was within his expectations. He reminded himself that to overcome his inability to cast spells, he had tried every kind of training method. He had studied all the books related to magic in the kingdom's library. A man standing next to him muttered, "What does within expectations even mean? And he haven't heard such arrogance in a long time." Cumberland glanced at the man and asked if he had something to say. The man, clearly intimidated, quickly congratulated Cumberland on his success. Isabella grabbed Cumberland's hand, urging him to go as they needed to head to the second exam site. The man watching them leave thought to himself that no matter how he looked at it, Cumberland didn't seem like a top student. They soon arrived at the examiner's office where the chief examiner, Yuji, remarked that the situation was downright ironic. He turned to another person and asked if they had heard the bell as well, expressing concern that Cumberland might disappoint them. The other person wondered if the one with the highest score was actually a muggle. He also commented that it was a bit sad as he had long felt that their mage examination system was outdated, which was why such a ridiculous situation had arisen. He usually dismissed the concerns, saying it wasn't a big deal. He was confident that the second test would weed out those who had relied on luck. The second test took place on the platform of trials. The examinee would stand at the center of the platform, and once the test began, the platform would generate an immense magical pressure, challenging their strength and resilience. In the second test, the examinee was required to fully utilize their magical power to resist the external pressure. As the pressure increased, the magic rings on the trial platform would light up one by one. Once all the magic rings were lit, forming a closed loop, the examiner would consider the test passed. Isabella turned to Cumberland and asked, "What's his plan for the second test? Have you figured out a strategy?" Cumberland shook his head, replying, "There were just some things we always have to face." When they reached the second test site, the examiner instructed them to halt. Cumberland presented his admission ticket, but the examiner simply told him it wouldn't work and that he should leave. Cumberland was taken aback and asked, "Why, and what's the reason?" The examiner replied that Cumberland wasn't eligible to take the second test because he lacked magical power. Having been in this position for over 40 years, the examiner could assess the condition of the examinees with a single glance. Cumberland calmly pointed out that according to Leary and Heat Academy's examination regulations, Article 24 stated that eligibility for the second test was determined by the result of the first test. Isabella, surprised, asked how Cumberland had memorized all that. The examiner dismissed Cumberland's words, telling him not to bother with such useless details. He referred to Cumberland as someone hoping for a chance, gambling on the possibility of success. He explained that every year, he dissuaded many examinees like Cumberland. Unfortunately, some died on the trial platform because it was an extremely serious test even for those with magical aptitude. There was always a risk of injury or death during the test. Cumberland, undeterred, quoted Article 52, which stated that examiners had the duty to protect and ensure the safety of the examinees. He reminded the examiner that what he held was a duty, not power. The examiner shouted at Cumberland, calling him a fool. He questioned if it was really worth dying just to become a mage. Outside, others were overhearing the exchange. Cumberland, still composed, cited National Law Article 17 Clause 13, which stated that anyone obstructing a mage or mage apprentice exam must bear the corresponding criminal responsibility. The examiner slammed his hand on the table, warning Cumberland to think it over carefully. He told Cumberland that he might not even be able to submit a request for interruption later on and could very well die on the testing platform. Cumberland thanked him for the reminder and stepped onto the platform. The examiner muttered to himself that trying to persuade Cumberland was like talking to a wall. He then announced that the examining was in position and the trial test would commence. As the trial began, Cumberland felt the immense pressure from the platform. It felt as if the pressure was penetrating his legs, his body, his organs, and even his bone marrow. It was so powerful. It felt as though everything inside him was being torn apart. The examiner, watching closely, warned him to keep an eye on the magic circles beneath his feet. He explained that as each segment lit up, the pressure would increase exponentially. He gave Cumberland one last chance to back out, asking if he regretted it and still wanted to stop the test. Isabella, watching from the sidelines, wondered how Cumberland was holding up. Cumberland's shirt was completely torn off, but he calmly stated that he was in excellent condition and feeling fine. The examiner was stunned, wondering how this was possible. Cumberland was clearly resisting with nothing but his physical body, and the magic circles had already lit up more than halfway. No one in the past had reached this point relying solely on their physical strength. Finally, the examiner asked if Cumberland could truly hold out, to which Cumberland replied, "He have said it 100 times. I'm still in excellent condition. My body doesn't feel anything like that." The magic circle was almost complete, and Isabella was encouraging Cumberland to hold on. She wondered why the test had turned out this way. The examiner continued to marvel at how it was even possible for muscles to resist magical pressure. Finally, the last segment of the circle lit up, and Cumberland passed the test. Isabella, overwhelmed with emotion, cheered for him. The others watching were equally shocked. The examiner, still in disbelief, questioned if there was truly a human in the world capable of resisting magical pressure with just their muscles. Cumberland then turned to the examiner and asked what he was still waiting for. "Just promote me. I want to take the final test." The examiner, taken aback, hesitated, but Cumberland's determination left little room for doubt. He was eager to proceed. The final test, known as the infinite stage test, was about to begin. The trial platform would continuously increase the magical pressure until it surpassed the highest record or reached the limit of the array on the platform. Isabella, still concerned, asked Cumberland why he wanted to continue after already passing the test. Cumberland, feeling the overwhelming pressure, snapped, "Stop talking nonsense and just test him." As the test continued, Cumberland struggled against the escalating pressure. His legs felt as if they were being pierced by the force, and he screamed out in agony. Isabella and the others could only watch helplessly while the examiner was equally shocked at Cumberland's determination. Suddenly, the bell rang again, surprising Yuji. He wondered aloud or triggered the bell this time. The sound of the bell echoed, leaving everyone stunned. The examinee wondered about the bell of praise ringing again, signaling that someone had broken the exam record once more. They quickly rushed to check the announcement as the sound of the bell was coming from the trial hall. They wondered how it could be so easy to break the record. Cumberland Key, with injuries on his face and body, stood there, and Isabella told him that his wounds were severe. She wondered why he had gone to such lengths. He apologized for making her worry and acknowledged his condition. As someone without magical aptitude, obtaining recognition from the mags was almost absurdly difficult. Therefore, he had pushed himself to the extreme, hoping to earn any chance of acknowledgement from the academy. From the start, he had been challenging the apprentice test. He had been challenging the entire system of rules and order in the mage world. Isabella then understood Cumberland's determination. Meanwhile, other examinees gathered around noticing Cumberland's name again on the list, and they wondered if it was a mistake or if he had actually broken the record in 2 consecutive exams. Yuji, angered by Netherland, who had overseen Cumberland's second exam, reminded him that he had instructed not to allow Cumberland to pass. So why had it happened? Netherland apologized, explaining that he had never seen a candidate so desperate. Uzi, however, called it ridiculous and reminded Netherland that his duty was to assess the candidate's magical abilities. Allowing a non-magical person to pass the exam was a blasphemy against the entire system. He asked if Nederland could justify wearing the examiner badge after this. Nederland apologized again, explaining that Cumberland met all the criteria outlined in the exam rules. He also suggested that if Uzi had seen how Cumberland left the trial room, he might understand. They couldn't arbitrarily take away an opportunity Cumberland had worked so hard for, especially considering how sincerely he believed in it. Nederland compared Cumberland's purity to the despicable act of privately deciding someone's future. With trembling hands, Nederland took off his badge, stating that his creed wouldn't allow him to betray Cumberland. He then told Yuji that he could take the badge if he wished. Yuji, turning away, scoffed, saying that it was madness. He didn't care about Nederland's badge, which had no real value now given Nederland was nearing retirement. Yuji believed he had to stop such madness. Every wizard exam was crucial, and you would not allow something so absurd to happen. Yuji then announced that the third trial of the wizard exam would be a magical combat contest. The rules were simple. The candidates would draw lots to determine their opponents, and 2 participants would step onto the stage for a magic duel. Both sides were required to use a magic wand for the contest, and the one who defeated their opponent with magic would be declared the winner. The candidates were instructed to bring their own magical instruments, and the competition would continue until the final 40 were selected, at which point they would be considered to have passed the exam. The examiner explained this to the students, mentioning that the contest would begin the next day, giving everyone half a day to prepare. The students were talking among themselves, expressing disbelief that the third trial would be a magic duel. It was crazy. One student mentioned that thanks to hiring a private tutor, he had already learned offensive spells. Another wondered about the fairness of candidates bringing their own magical instruments, speculating that if they encountered a rich young master, it wouldn't be fair. But someone else disagreed, arguing that money was already part of one's strength. Cumberland understood that they were already being targeted. Isabella then asked what they should do. Cumberland suggested they buy magical instruments. Lurien City, after all, was known for its abundance of magical resources, and there were more than a dozen magical instrument shops in the city alone. Cumberland picked a wand from a shop and tried to use magic, but the shopkeeper quickly asked him to stop. She warned that if he broke anything in the store, he would have to compensate for it at full price. She then told them to leave as the store didn't meet their needs. Isabella encouraged Cumberland, saying she had heard there were a few more shops in the West District and suggested they check them out. Cumberland declined, explaining that he just wanted to confirm something. He felt that he couldn't activate any magical instrument, and the rules of the exam seemed so tricky. As they walked, they were stopped by a man who told them they were in the wrong place. Isabella quickly realized they had accidentally stumbled into the territory of the Broken Sky Gang. Cumberland asked who they were, and Isabella explained that the Broken Sky Gang was a group of fallen knights and abandoned apprentices who had formed a criminal organization. One of the gang members, a woman, informed her boss that Isabella appeared to be a mage apprentice. The boss replied that apprentices would be dealt with later after they had cleaned up any traces. Cumberland, not fully understanding the situation, commented that the gang seemed like just a small group helping each other out. Isabella clarified that there were only 3 of them, and later, they could charge out together. Cumberland corrected her, pointing out that there were 5 attackers, one shooting from above and another preparing to strike with a sword. Cumberland stopped the arrow that was headed for Isabella, and the others rushed to attack him. He punched one assailant and then threw the arrow toward another. As the third attacker began chanting a spell, Cumberland effortlessly deflected it with his hand, dismissing it as a petty trick. Finally, one of the attackers got close to Isabella, but Cumberland grabbed his face and threw him into another assailant. Isabella was shocked by what she had witnessed. Just then, the boss struck Cumberland on the head with a hammer, lamenting the loss of so many of his elites. Despite the blow, Cumberland remained unharmed, which left the boss stunned. Cumberland then grabbed the boss's face, taunting him about trying to sneak up from behind. His words were interrupted as he seized the hammer from the man's grip. Isabella called out, asking if he was all right. Cumberland reassured her not to worry, but then noticed that the hammer was starting to transform, freezing his hand. He realized the weapon had been enchanted with ice magic. Cumberland was stunned, and the man laughed, haunting him for falling into the trap. Cumberland was left wondering how the man could have something like that. The man told Cumberland that it wasn't pleasant and asked if he could feel a frostbite. He explained that the frost would spread throughout Cumberland's body, eventually freezing his heart and causing him to die. Asher then asked how Cumberland was feeling, to which Cumberland replied, "It's a bit and indeed something." Cumberland easily broke free from the frost by tightening his muscles, which left the man shocked. Isabella asked if the frost magic hadn't hurt him. Cumberland mentioned that he had found a way to practice during the third test. The scene shifted to the next day where all the candidates were gathering for the third test. The host addressed the participants, urging them to focus as the next event was the third trial of the Mage Apprentice examination, the Magic Combat Tournament. He instructed the contestants to enter in an orderly manner. Isabella stayed behind in the audience to cheer Kunlun on. Kunlun, confident, reassured himself that he would do his best. A man observed Kunlun and remarked that he looked unexpectedly useful, wondering if he had mistakenly thought this was the Knight Apprentice arena. Another person wondered what Kunlun was carrying on his back. A boy with red hair remarked that the magic arena wasn't a place for comparing sizes. Someone else speculated that the boy might be Diffik, the genius. Another person agreed, saying they had heard that Diffik looked like an elementary school student but possessed extraordinary strength. They realized they couldn't underestimate the examination this year. Yuji and a man were observing the event from a room. The man mentioned the modification of the rule where the contesting parties must use magical tools to attack with magic, and defeating the opponent would count as a victory. He thought it was a cautious approach. Yuji remarked that for the honor of the academy, being overly cautious was not excessive, and that even if they found a reason, eliminating someone on the arena floor would be the safest approach. The man reassured him, saying that he had managed the agreements and could legitimately eliminate the opponent in the third trial. All the contestants were asked to line up according to their draw numbers, and they were about to see the groupings. One person wondered whether passing the exam depended largely on luck. Another person commented that luck was always a part of strength. They were looking at Group 35, which was considered terrifying because number 178 was the recently famous contender, Quida. Number 176 was the genius heir of a prestigious mage family, Melo. Number 180 was the holder of a special bloodline, Sorrel, and lastly, number 179 was the magical girl, Looming. The contestants were surprised to see that all the strongest contenders were grouped together, and the competition, Group 35, was going to be incredibly fierce. Someone remarked that the person who drew number 177 would be very unlucky. Another person quickly told them to keep their voice down. The man with Yuji thought that with a little manipulation during the draw, they could legitimately eliminate such chaos. Finally, the duels began. Though it was an entrance exam for major apprentices, most candidates already had some basic knowledge of magical combat, making the competition extremely intense. After some time, it was finally the turn of Group 35. Melo was knocked to the ground, and people murmur that Melo, the talented heir of a mage family, was once one of the most promising candidates for that year's apprentice exam. It was said that at just 14 years old, Melo had already mastered 3 attacking spells. Cumberland was surprised to hear this and remarked that achieving that level of skill even before becoming an apprentice was impressive. Melo's opponent, of course, was none other than Cumberland. A man commented that meeting Melo in the first round was truly unfortunate for his opponent. This reminded them of Cumberland's name. He was the one who had triggered the wisdom belt twice on the first day of the exam. They wondered if Cumberland was really that person, but he didn't seem like a mage. His physique was an exaggerated contrast to what they expected, and everyone knew that strength was often inversely proportional to one's physique. One contestant pointed out that they should just look at Melo, who took out his magic wand, the Jade Heart. Another person remarked that it was said to be a famous artifact from the Abyss of Extremes. They then wondered about Cumberland's magic tool. Honestly, no one could feel any magical fluctuation from him at all. The host asked Cumberland to prepare as well. Cumberland apologized, explaining that his magic wand was a bit oversized, then took out a giant wand. The other contestant stared, puzzled by what he was holding, and murmurs of surprise spread through the crowd. Cumberland recalled the previous day when the magic wand had been given to him by the kind people from the Broken Sky Gang who had asked for his mercy. That was all the equipment they had. Cumberland remembered gripping the neck of the gang leader who had pleaded for their lives and then shown him the magic tools they possessed. Cumberland realized that the key to enhancing the weapon lay in the special materials, which was why he had sought out the blacksmith Ajax to help him craft the wand. Ajax had been surprised when Cumberland asked him to melt down those magic tools and forge a club instead. He had been insulted by the request as it undermined his craftsmanship. Furthermore, Ajax had claimed there wasn't enough time advising Cumberland to leave. However, Cumberland had simply placed a bag of money on the table, and Ajax, now more interested, had said that it wasn't about the time. It was about his love for forging. He assured Cumberland that he would leave it to him, and Cumberland could be 100% sure of the result. In the end, with the full support of the enthusiastic blacksmith, the enchanted wand was finally completed. Isabella, standing next to the dead body of the Broken Sky Gang leader, remarked to Cumberland that it seemed the leader really couldn't squeeze out any more magical power. Cumberland simply shrugged, saying it didn't matter for now unless they were weaklings. The scene returned to the present where Izzy stood with a man next to him, both watching as the contestants observed Cumberland in shock. Someone mentioned that they knew Cumberland would pull something like that out, and it was ridiculous, a long-handled blunt weapon. Another person even commented that it was against the rules. Cumberland snapped at them to shut up and told them to watch closely. He then released a surge of power from the weapon, causing everyone to be even more surprised. He explained that it was an authentic magic wand, and according to the Academy Code, there were no restrictions on the weight or length of a magic wand. The crowd was stunned. They realized that the wand emanated frost magic. Cumberland thought it was better to use it sparingly as the number of times he could emit light from it was limited. Yuji was shocked, calling it nonsense. He believed that the weapon was clearly an enchanted item and was planning to apply to the examination committee to revoke Cumberland's exam qualification. The man, however, asked him to wait and explained that Cumberland was exploiting a loophole in the instrument clause. Legally, it would be difficult for them to revoke Cumberland's qualification based on that alone. As Yuji hesitated, the man advised him not to let anger cloud his judgment. He reminded Yuji that Cumberland came from the background of a mage family and should not be underestimated. The man then suggested that Yuji use Melo to take down Cumberland, allowing the magic to curse the barbarian. With that, it would be a complete victory for their enrollment philosophy. As all the contestants stood in the arena, they were asked to wait for a while as the examination committee discussed the details of the competition. Melo approached, calling out to Cumberland, and told him that just because someone was large didn't mean they were strong. He explained that the essence of magic lay in using the rules of the world to achieve victory even when one was weaker. Melo admitted that he didn't understand how someone as brute as Cumberland had managed to achieve such impressive results. Someone in the crowd remarked that Melo truly lived up to his reputation, noting that his words and actions were quite different. Even though they were opponents, they still respected each other enough to teach one another. Isabella seemed worried about Cumberland. One contestant agreed with Melo, stating that magic had a natural advantage over brute force. Another added that in that case, knights and rangers of the same level must submit to mags, and that Cumberland's large club clearly slowed down his spellcasting speed, a ridiculous choice. The examiner addressed all the candidates, announcing that after the committee's discussion, the schedule would remain unchanged. The candidates mentioned that the examination committee must have made their decision based on this. Finally, the duel between Melo and Cumberland began. Melo charged forward to attack first, but Cumberland struck with his weapon, sending Melo crashing to the ground, leaving all the viewers in shock. Cumberland apologized, stating that he never underestimated his opponent's strength. The other contestants were equally stunned, and Cumberland asked if someone could help Melo as there was still some time left. The hosts announced Cumberland as the winner, which made Isabella happy while others remained shocked at the way Cumberland had defeated his opponent. Some wondered if they were witnessing a joke or if they were dreaming. The man with Yuji was taken aback, and Yuji trembled, wondering what had just happened. The man remarked that it was because Melo had been careless, likely due to his lack of experience fighting warriors. As a result, he let his guard down. Yuji then mentioned that it was pointless to dwell on that now and asked if the man was sure about the death group. The man responded that he believed Melo had simply made a momentary mistake and that the next candidates, now aware of his situation, would not make the same error. At the arena, the referee asked Cumberland to step down as it was time for the other candidates to compete. Cumberland replied that he would like to request a guarding challenge. The referee was surprised, and Cumberland repeated that he wanted to request a guarding challenge. He pointed out that it was only through a guarding challenge that the referee could challenge the record of the virtuous echo in that event, and the rule was explained in Article 2 on page 43 of the Academy Examination Regulation. The referee glanced at the book, wondering why Cumberland would want to initiate guarding challenge. It had been so many years since anyone had done that, so he needed to check the details. The other contestants were surprised to hear this and began wondering about the meaning of requesting a guarding challenge. One boy mentioned that it meant Cumberland wanted to stay on the stage and challenge all the competitors in that year's competition in a rotating battle. Everyone was shocked to hear this, of some muttering that it was so arrogant. They pointed out that Cumberland had only defeated Melo because of a lucky attack, and now he was acting so arrogantly. Yuji told the man to agree with that, adding that Cumberland was asking for trouble. The host announced that Cumberland had initiated a guarding challenge and all the other candidates would take turns challenging him based on their candidate numbers. The highest record for the virtuous echo in the exam was 17 people. The contestants were astonished to hear this, muttering that it was arrogant and insulting to all of them. Quetta stepped onto the ground, stating that based on the candidate numbers, he would be the next to challenge Cumberland. The others were surprised to see Quetta approach the stage, and they began cheering for him, urging him to defeat Cumberland. Quetta thought this was a great opportunity to make a name for himself, but he, like Melo, underestimated Cumberland. He soon realized that Cumberland's abilities were extraordinary, having tripped up Melo earlier. As Quetta maintained his distance from Cumberland, someone in the crowd remarked that Melo lost because he hadn't had the chance to cast his attack spells. Another person pointed out that the advantage of a mage lay in their ranged attacks, so now they were curious to see how Kido handled the situation. When the referee called for the match to begin, Cumberland disappeared from his spot so quickly, closing the distance between himself and Kido to launch an attack. Tsueda, shocked, quickly thought of casting his instant spell, Thunderbolt. Even though the spell hit Kunlun, Kunlun effortlessly countered, striking Tsueda with his weapon and sending him crashing brutally into the wall. The spectators, including the examiner, were stunned by the sight of Tsueda's defeat. Cumberland calmly remarked that his strength control was perfect, allowing him to win the match smoothly without causing his opponent lifelong disabilities, which he considered an admirable feat. The examiner was completely shocked by Cumberland's display of power. The contestants discussed how Cumberland had been hit by the lightning spell, and it seemed that Cumberland's defense was incredibly strong, allowing him to win the match without difficulty. Usually, wonder what kind of person Cumberland was. Isabella, appreciating Cumberland's performance, thought that she wanted to cheer louder for him, but something in her felt like it wasn't quite right. The medical team rushed in to provide urgent care for Kuida. As the man asked for the next contestant, Looming Boy forfeited. As Searle's turn came, he seemed tense and chose to forfeit, thinking that as long as the others won their matches, only fools would tangle with a monster like Cumberland. A boy spoke up, saying it was his turn next, and he too would choose to forfeit. As the others looked at him, he asked what they were staring at, pointing out that even Dahlia and Rumen had chosen to forfeit. Did they think he was the only one being foolish? One by one, the others also chose to forfeit. The exam returned to Yuji, mentioning that there had been a wave of forfeits with multiple candidates consecutively choosing to withdraw rather than compete against candidate 177. The man referred to them as cowards and wondered what would happen if this trend continued. Yuji looked at him and asked if this was his confident plan. The man, looking nervous, responded that he still had a trick up his sleeve. After Group 35, he had arranged for a trump card, Mage Jalong, candidate 191. Jalong had been disqualified from the previous exam for killing a candidate, but the man estimated that his strength was on par with a junior mage, and he was an extremely peculiar individual. His candidate number was 189. The man believed that Jalong could put an end to Kunlun's antics, and if they both ended up injuring each other, it would be even better. Yuji admired the man's educational philosophy but found it somewhat conservative. The man then showed an artifact, claiming it was the Sea Monster Bone Remnant, a stellar-grade artifact that could trigger passive physical defense. Yuji moved closer to the man, reflecting that those who achieved great things were not bound by the details and those who upheld righteousness did not hesitate to use any means necessary. Meanwhile, the host announced that many candidates were withdrawing. One person wondered aloud if they were all just going to let Cumberland break the record easily without anyone daring to challenge him. Hearing this, another person decided it was time to take action and accepted the challenge. Finally, candidate 191 stepped forward to fight. As they saw, it was Jalong wearing the artifact. Jalong addressed Cumberland, telling him that the stage was not suited for him and that he should consider becoming a warrior or a blacksmith instead. He warned Cumberland that once the match started, Cumberland's life would be in danger and that he could only offer his warning. A contestant murmured that they had heard Jalong was disqualified from the last exam for brutally killing a candidate. Another added that Jalong had killed even more mags over the past 3 years. As the duel began, Cumberland moved swiftly to attack, but Jalong conjured a barrier to protect himself, leaving the spectator stunned. They quickly realized that it was a magical barrier, one that could only be mastered by star-rank mags. Jalong attacked Cumberland with an inferno burst. The spectators were shocked by the sheer power of the attack. Jalong quickly apologized, saying he had no intention of killing Cumberland. Cumberland emerged from the attack, calmly asking if that was truly the case before grabbing Jalong's hand and telling him that he would repent. Cumberland struck again, but the magical barrier protected Jalong, even causing Cumberland to pull his hand away. It was clear that the artifact was providing immense power, and Jalong understood just how powerful it was. Jalong then launched another inferno burst, hitting Cumberland directly. The candidates were in awe, realizing that this was another form of stellar magic. Isabella appeared worried for Cumberland. The candidate remarked that not even a mage could master several forms of stellar magic. Jalong, determined to end the duel quickly, thought that he needed to enter the academy and learn the secrets of spirituality. Otherwise, his body would collapse sooner or later. He watched in disbelief as Cumberland came out of the attack, nonchalantly remarking that it was just superficial magic, much weaker than the mage he had killed with his bare hands. Jalong was stunned to see that Cumberland hadn't died. The other candidates were equally shocked and began to wonder if Cumberland had truly killed a mage before. Isabella called out to Cumberland, urging him to be careful. Cumberland calmly replied, telling her not to worry as he had already found a way to defeat Jalong. The man watching with Yuji was bewildered, wondering how Cumberland was withstanding these stellar attacks. He questioned whether Cumberland was using footwork to dodge vital points or if he had some kind of body shielding technique. Yuji, however, replied that Cumberland didn't have any defensive techniques at all. He was using his body as the shield. Gia was enraged by the message claiming that he would surely kill Cumberland, and in his fury, he attacked with Dark Flame. The contestants were shocked to witness the black magic, and Gia declared that he had won the match. However, suddenly, Cumberland returned, mentioning that Gia's anger only made him stronger. Cumberland grabbed Gia's face and continued, explaining that Gia had probably used some kind of artifact, but the triggering mechanism had been a strong impact. He revealed that the reason he was able to grab Gia's hand at that moment was because with just a slow exertion, Gia's shield couldn't be triggered. The contestants were left wondering what was going on. Couldn't Cumberland even be stopped by black magic? It didn't even seem to affect him. Uzi was in shock, amazed at Cumberland's keen observation skills and his ability to make such an accurate judgment about the triggering mechanism of the sea demon bone remnant so quickly. Cumberland gently twisted Gia's head down and arranged medical treatment for him. The referee agreed, though they wondered why Cumlin was the one giving orders. As Cumlin was declared the winner, the contestants were left in complete doubt, unsure of what would happen next. In a subsequent 3 rounds of competition, no one volunteered to compete, and Cumlin won accolades for his third trial victory. Jiho believed Cumlin was invincible. Uzi then asked a man to inform Cumlin that he wished to meet him. When Cumlin arrived at Yuji's office, he asked if Yuji truly wanted to see him. Yuji realized that things were escalating and mentioned that Cumberland had made a remarkable impression by triggering the Bell of Wisdom 3 times. Cumberland acknowledged Yuji's good fortune in the draw for the match schedules. Yuji, however, was focused on a different matter and mentioned that he had investigated Cumberland's background. He discovered that Cumberland had accidentally killed a visiting apprentice mage from the Motion family and had come to the academy to avoid the trouble. Cumberland asked how pervasive were the information channels among mags. Yuji replied that they were well aware of Cumberland's situation and noted that he lacked magical aptitude. However, Yuji promised Cumberland that he would use his influence to settle the dispute over the mage's death. But there was a condition. Cumberland would have to voluntarily withdraw from the competition. Yuji knew that Cumberland was the successor to Mage Burn and recognized his outstanding combat skills and talent. Still, the path of a mage wasn't suited for Cumberland. If Cumberland was willing, Yuji would write him a recommendation letter to become a royal knight. Cumberland referred to him as the considerate examiner, but then asked if knights had the authority. He used the continental teleportation portal to travel to the mage capital. Yuji was confused and responded, certainly not. Knights don't have that authority. The rules state that only mags qualified to control the continent-level teleportation portals. Cumberland then mentioned, so the recommendation letter for becoming a knight was unnecessary since the only requirement he have could be fulfilled by becoming a mage. Yuji raised his voice, incredulous. Stop joking. A muggle like he wants to become a mage. That's absurd. Cumberland calmly replied, don't knock it until they try it. Besides, wasn't the academy selecting apprentices based on exam scores? His personal advice seems irrelevant. Yuji slammed his hand on the table, calling Cumberland an insolvent and stubborn kid. Cumberland responded, if he have nothing else to say, he will be leaving. He will handle the third-rate family matters myself. You don't have to worry about it. As Cumberland turned to leave, Yuji, now even more enraged, slammed the table again, muttering under his breath that Cumberland was a fool. He thought to himself that he wouldn't allow anyone to undermine his exams. Yuji then asked Rayleigh to announce the 4th trial exam, which would be the Spirit Beast Hunter test, to be personally examined by Yuji. Riley was shocked and asked, were we really going to arrange such a difficult topic for the final trial? Yuji told him, just do as he say. The 4th trial, the Spirit Beast Hunter, required participants to venture into the eerie Mistwood Forest, locate a spirit beast whose magical aura resonated with their own, and then use enhancement spells to capture the spirit beast as their familiar. They would then have to return to the academy with the familiar, pass an inspection, and then complete the exam. As the contestants heard the details, they all murmured in shock. One person mentioned that he had never even heard of this trial before. Another contestant remarked that it was outrageous. They weren't even apprentices yet. One of them, a third-time retaker, expressed that it was the hardest exam he had ever faced. A man reassured them, don't worry. There will be tutors on site teaching the enhancement spells. Uzi added this trial was also a test of the candidate's ability to learn. The key thing to remember was that the Mistwood Forest was dangerous. While candidates can operate within the outermost Tier 1 forest, they must not venture too deep. If they stray into more dangerous areas, the Academy's rescue team won't be responsible. The candidates were shocked to learn that the Academy wasn't even guaranteeing their safety, which made the trial even more dangerous. Yuji further stated that the path of a mage had always been fraught with difficulties, and if they were worried about their safety, it would be better for them to give up now. He made eye contact with Cumberland as he said this, then continued, there will be tutors on site to explain the essence of spellcasting. The candidates wondered if the trial was about to begin. One of the examiners told them that he would explain the enchantment spell only once. Isabella turned to Cumberland and said, it seems like you are being targeted. What should we do now? Cumberland replied, they will have to take it step by step and plan things out. The scene shifted to the next morning when the 4th trial's Spirit Beast Hunter officially began. The contestants were told to return before sunset. As they walked, some remarked on how difficult the exam was this year. One person wondered if anyone truly understood the enchantment magic that the teacher had demonstrated earlier. Another replied that he only understood half of it and was still unsure about the rest. Isabella turned to Cumberland and, with concern, told him that the Mistwood Forest was extremely dangerous. She wished him to be careful. Cumberland reassured her, saying, "Don't worry, and he will do my best." He then set off, unsure of where to begin, finding the task ahead to be quite tricky. Unbeknownst to him, someone was watching from behind a tree. The person thought to himself he didn't expect the opportunity to come so quickly. Difficult smiled, feeling lucky. He had managed to avoid encountering any monsters in the third trial and hadn't expected both Melo and Quida to fall victim to Cumberland. Fortunately, Defuk had entered the fourth trial with a decent score. He had been mastering spells since he was 9 years old and was confident he would succeed this time. Just then, Looming and a boy approached Defek, asking if he wanted to team up. Defek scoffed, replying, the trial was about finding and capturing the spirit beasts. What's the point of teaming up? He thought to himself that both Looming and the boy had failed the third trial and their scores were far behind his own. It seemed strange that they would want to team up with him. Looming, undeterred, asked that wasn't he interested in becoming the top contender of this year's exam. She heard there were very generous rewards for the top scorers and they will help him out. Defek found it ridiculous and they too were competitors. So why would they suddenly be so kind? The boy, however, explained the truth. We failed the third trial and now we must score high in the fourth trial if we have any chance of passing. That's why we'd like to team up with you. Together, we can capture a second-tier spirit beast in the second-tier forest. Defek considered it for a moment. Were they really planning to capture second-tier spirit beasts just for a high score? He thought about how his situation was different from theirs. It seemed clear that the fourth trial was targeting Cumberland, who lacked any magic power. If Cumberland was eliminated in the fourth trial, Defa believed the ultimate title of Tanki would remain up for grabs. Cumberland always surprised him, and if he somehow passed the fourth trial in an unexpected way, there might still be a chance for him to claim the title. Finally, Defuk agreed to team up with Looming and the boy. His condition, however, was that he would capture a spirit beast first. Both Looming and the boy agreed to this. Meanwhile, Cumberland, walking alone, suddenly sneezed. He wondered aloud, who's talking behind my back? All of a sudden, a few warriors appeared, armed with weapons. An old man leaning on a stick asked that if he really Cumberland. Cumberland responded by asking who they were and why they were acting so sneakily. The warriors confirmed it was him and then moved to capture him. Cumberland, without hesitation, kicked one of them, wondering how they dared to approach him like that. As another warrior charged at him with a sword, Cumberland punched it, breaking the weapon in the process. The old man began chanting a spell and attacked with roots that erupted from the ground, trying to bind Cumberland. He wondered what kind of sorcery this was. Two more warriors leaped forward, attempting to kill him with spears. Though his hands were bound by the roots, Cumberland managed to stop the spears by grabbing their sharp tips, drawing blood in the process. He then punched the attackers away, freeing himself from the restraints. You're quite good, Cumberland said, addressing the old man. But how dare he commit murder in broad daylight? The old man, stunned, thought about how it was even possible for Cumberland to break free. He fled in disbelief, realizing that the intelligence they had gathered was wrong as Cumberland's strength was clearly beyond that of an apprentice. Cumberland grabbed one of the spears and hurled it at the old man, shouting, "Don't even think about escaping." The spear pierced the old man's body with incredible speed, and he fell lifeless to the ground. After a moment, Cumberland realized his mistake. He had killed them all, and he still had no idea who had tried to assassinate him. As he surveyed the scene, Cumberland noticed a badge near the face of one of the corpses. He picked it up, intending to ask Isabella about it later. For now, though, he knew he had to focus on the exam. It was far more important. Just then, he heard a noise behind him. Turning around, he saw a wild creature standing there, and he was wondering if the smell of blood had attracted it. It was a mist-hidden horned fox, a second-tier monster. Cumberland estimated there were about 20 of them in total, and the exam required the contestants to control the wild beasts with spirit magic. Cumberland muttered a few words under his breath, trying to remember the incantation. He repeated a few more attempts, but stopped short when he realized the fox didn't react at all. At least give him some response, Cumberland said, puzzled. And if you really have no magical talent, then the fox roared, and Cumberland watched it carefully. After a moment, he sighed. It seems this was not the spirit beast that resonates with my soul. Diffa was trying to control the beast, instructing it to simply obey his commands as it soared through the sky, following his wishes. It was an 8-armed lass, a second-tier beast. The boy and Looming were helping her as well, and Diffa proudly declared that it was fantastic he had caught one, now eager to see who could compete with him. Looming asked him to wait for a while, but to Diffa, it seemed like a piece of cake. They congratulated him, saying that this was their chance. Meanwhile, Cumberland had just defeated a beast, standing triumphantly on top of it as he remarked that it was difficult to find a well-behaved and obedient pet. He had also defeated a second beast of the same kind and commented that it wouldn't work. These beasts had such low intelligence that communication with them was impossible. He reminisced about his grandfather telling him that some powerful beasts have the ability to bewitch minds, suggesting their intelligence should be considerably higher. However, given the current situation, it was impossible for him to communicate with spirit beasts. The only solution he realized was to find a spirit beast capable of effective communication. As Yuji and the others stood by waiting for the candidates, Rayleigh arrived and informed them that the patrol team had found traces of a secret mage organization in the forest. Yuji wondered if the secret mage group was really involved. Weren't they just a bunch of rats who often collaborated with other factions? What were those bastard rats doing in the mountains now? A man arrived to deliver a report informing them that the 5th patrol team had uncovered new information. The tutors asked what had happened. The man explained that deep in the second-tier forest, they had found signs of a battle and discovered the bodies of 5 members of the secret mage group, including one who was a stellar mage. Yuji was shocked, wondering how they had dared to fight in his examination arena. This would certainly mean an increase in patrols. He instructed that word be spread about how those pests had dared to disrupt the academy's exams, and he vowed to completely uproot them. One of the men remarked that it seemed there had been an unexpected event. Isabella hoped Kunlun would be lucky. In the afternoon at 3:45 p.m., the first candidate returned after completing the task so quickly, his mental strength clearly exceptional. They discovered that the candidate was number 93, Alan, who had brought back the first-tier spirit beast, the white-crested mountain pheasant. A man informed Alan that he needed to demonstrate his control over the spirit, as control was also one of the scoring criteria for the 4th trial. People commented that it was amazing, noting that those who establishing mental connection with their spirit beasts could control them effortlessly. Some felt jealous, while others remarked that it was incredible. Passing the mage exam was now almost guaranteed for him. After that, more candidates kept arriving with their spirits, though some came injured and empty-handed. Meanwhile, Cumberland was walking by the lake, wondering why it seemed different from the map. The place was famous and it felt uncomfortable. He wondered if he had gotten lost and why there were fewer and fewer monsters in the area. As evening approached, he decided to hurry up. As the sun was about to set, contestants and examiners were still wondering. A man remarked that he never thought there would be candidates capable of capturing second-tier spirit beasts and that this exam was the hardest they had ever heard of. Another man commented that so many outstanding candidates had appeared. Isabella then excused herself and asked a man if he had seen candidate 177. The man asked if she was referring to that big guy, and Batty apologized, explaining that he hadn't seen Kunlun in his inspection area. Daifuk approached Isabella and mentioned that they had encountered Kunlun when they ventured deeper into the second-tier forest. Isabella asked what happened and if they knew where Cumberland had gone. Diffit replied that they had seen Cumberland heading into the mountains full of eagerness. Diffit thought the chances of Cumberland returning were slim. Isabella seemed frightened by this. Yugi, betting slightly, noted that everyone had gathered, so they should be prepared to announce the end of the exam. Isabella gazed for the forest, thinking that Cumberland must return safely. Diffek, however, believed it was impossible as the sun was already setting and he hadn't seen anyone. He mused that the one who would ultimately win the Chiang Kai title would be him to fuck. Bendo then began announcing to call the participants, contestants, and spectators, declaring that he would now end the 4th trial's hunting phase. Just as he spoke, the ground shook, and everyone wondered what was happening was an earthquake. Then they heard the ghost-level disaster alarm. A beast emerged from the ground, and people shouted that it was an invasion by a ghost-level beast. Yuji was in shock, and people wondered if it was the Earth Dragon of Mistwood Forest. They questioned why it was attacking the academy as the creature normally didn't leave its territory. At that moment, someone noticed a figure sitting on its back. It was Kunlun. Kunlun struck the beast and commanded, "Kneel down," which it did immediately. He then commented that it seemed they had arrived just in time. Kunlun ordered the beast to sing and dance, putting on a show for everyone. The beast began to roar, dancing, and even spinning in place. The crowd was left in shock, wondering if this monster was Kunlun's companion. Isabella, relieved, smiled as she watched Kunlun, thinking as expected of him. At night, Yuji was holding a meeting with all the examiners. He began by saying that the topic of discussion was the performance of the candidate, Kunlun. He believed that Kunlun had used inappropriate methods to achieve his scores. The final trial had even been called chaos in the examination hall, resulting in many injuries. Therefore, Yuji proposed revoking Cumberland's examination qualification and asked for everyone's opinions on the matter. One man remarked that it was an interesting story. Another commented that a muggle had actually caused all 4 exams to ring the bell of experience. The 3rd examiner noted that the bell during the 4th trial was the disaster alarm. The fourth added that, ultimately, it didn't align with the purpose of the examination. A man told Yuji that he had no intention of refuting his decision, but based solely on the written exam section for which he was responsible, Cumberland's performance had been exemplary. Needland stood up and reiterated his stance, stating that in the second trial, Cumberland's outstanding performance met all the examination rules and that was where he stood. A chubby man disagreed, arguing that in the third trial, Cumberland had simply exploited the loopholes in the examination rules. He proposed that Cumberland's bells of excellence should be revoked. A man told him that it was easy to say, but the bells of excellence were a creation of the Mage Association. He asked how the chubby man proposed to alter its record. The chubby man replied that they would have to apply to the association's headquarters. The man asked that he was kidding. Yuji shouted that enough was enough. He stated that the purpose of the Mage Apprentice examination was to select individuals with the greatest magical talent for the academy, and Cumberland's situation was completely at odds with the exam's main objective. If the academy admitted such apprentices, wouldn't it become a laughingstock? He hoped they could all unanimously pass the proposal to revoke Cumberland's examination results. The headmaster entered and remarked that if internal meetings were held to decide the fate of the candidates, then what was the point of the examination's significance? Everyone stood up to show respect to the headmaster and greeted him. The headmaster addressed Yuji, telling him that he had heard they had recruited some interesting apprentices this year. Yuji replied that it had been an unexpected turn in this year's examination as they had allowed a candidate with no magical ability to pass all the tests. To ensure the fairness of the examination, he proposed revoking Cumberland's results. The headmaster dismissed the idea as nonsense, remarking that the young were often more confused than the old. Yuji asked him to enlighten him. The headmaster then asked what was the most important thing for a mage. He explained that it was a rule that if a participant had passed all their tests according to the rules, they must be accepted as a mage apprentice. Otherwise, what was the point of having rules for the examination? That matter had already been settled by the sons of the other three academies, and it was no longer something they could suppress privately. He added that, fortunately, they had acted impulsively, or it would have damaged the reputation of the academy. Uzi agreed, thanking him for his guidance. The headmaster then asked why they hadn't discussed who would be Cumberland's mentor, adding that he would excuse himself now. They all bade him farewell. Among the mage apprentices who passed the test, there were distinctions between the ordinary apprentices and the inner disciples. The inner disciples received personal instruction from mags and had more opportunities to participate in mage trial tasks to advance toward becoming full mags. They usually resided in the mage towers alongside the mags. Most apprentices who entered the academy begin as ordinary apprentices after passing the exam. They accumulate credits by completing tasks assigned by the academy and participating in collective courses to complete their studies. They reside in the academy dormitories. There was a rule in the apprentice examination that the first place winner of each session or the candidate who rings the bell of excellence will directly become an inner disciple. Yuji wondered who would win the title of Chianki that year. One man said that his tower seemed to be full already. Another mentioned that he had been a bit busy lately. The third one ignored that comment. Yugi, angered by the responses, was about to speak when the fat man added that he did have a recommendation for a mentor. The next day was the entrance ceremony of Lyrian Heights Academy for the 172nd Apprentice Mage examination. All the students were congratulated for donning the apprentice robes. One student wondered aloud if there were only fewer than 20 people left, and another asked if this was not the hardest exam in decades. Then Isabella arrived with Kunlum in student uniform. She commented that she hadn't expected the overseas robe to look like that on him. Cumberland replied that he still preferred to wear casual clothes. All the students were asked to wait for the moment as the ceremony was about to begin. Lorenzo called Cumberland over to introduce himself, guessing that Cumberland would call him the assigned teacher by the academy. Cumberland simply greeted him, but Lorenzo stopped him, saying that he didn't want to be Cumberland's teacher and had never had a good impression of someone as large as Cumberland. However, it was an assignment from the academy, and since he had heard that Cumberland valued the rules, he suggested they stick to them. Lorenzo explained that when a mage selects an apprentice, there was usually a personal test involved. Cumberland, not understanding, looked to Isabella for clarification. She explained that Lorenzo meant that mags often had a simple test when selecting apprentices, such as asking questions or greetings, usually just a formality. Cumberland apologized, mentioning that he didn't understand those things and asked if Lorenzo had any requirements to which he should just teach him directly. Lorenzo agreed, asking Cumberland to follow him. They went to the practice field, where Lorenzo told Cumberland that although he didn't particularly like him, he didn't exactly hate him either. He explained that the test for Cumberland would be extremely simple. Cumberland had to use the magical power within him to ignite a wooden stick with fire elemental energy. It was just the simplest form of a fireball spell, and as long as Cumberland could do that, Lorenzo would recognize him as his apprentice. Lorenzo asked if such a simple test was fair enough. Others were watching, and Kunlun thought about using the magical power within him to ignite a wooden stake with fire elemental energy. He muttered to himself that it wasn't too much to ask. Others were watching him, and he thought it was only right. Clearly, the glory of being the champion that year should belong to him. Lorenzo asked to begin the event. Yuji and another man were observing from the office window, and Yuji commented that it was a disappointing event. He hadn't expected any developments, yet it turned out to be excellent. The man replied that the plan could be seen as killing two birds with one stone. Not only would it persuade the barbarian to withdraw according to the rules, but it would also provide an opportunity to strike at Lorenzo, that useless fellow. Furthermore, with the upcoming assembly of the new Mage Tower Association, whether they accepted or rejected the apprentice, it would ultimately force Lorenzo to give up on the Mage Tower. USU remarked that he hadn't expected the barbarian who had been a source of trouble to turn into a boon for them. The man agreed, calling the move a masterstroke. Cumberland then asked if that was true. After Lorenzo's agreement, Cumberland mentioned that he would need time to prepare for the test. Lorenzo then asked how much time he required. Cumberland requested 1 day, and Lorenzo told him that if he completed it before sunset, he would pass. Otherwise, he would have to leave on his own. Cumberland agreed, and then Lorenzo left. Isabella called Cumberland asking what they should do next. He replied that he would have to venture into the Mistwood Forest again. She asked if he had any plans in mind. He denied it, saying that perhaps he could only try the method he was currently thinking of, and then asked her to wait for him. She suggested accompanying him, believing she might be able to help. He replied that it was a challenge he must face alone. He thought to himself that he needed to become a mage at any cost, and that would be the first step toward making his mark in the world. When others heard that he had left the academy for something, they were confused. However, when Yuji heard the news, he mentioned that Cumberland had surely gone to the Mistwood Forest. The man didn't understand, and Yuji wondered what Cumberland was planning. Lorenzo, the holder of a third-tier magic stone within the Tower of the Wind, a star-grade mage tower, was speaking with his fourth apprentice, Terry, and his second apprentice, Nini. Terry told him that he couldn't agree with the current plan, while Nini added that even if it was a test, Lorenzo should give Kunlun a difficult task to force him to drop out. Lorenzo dismissed their concerns, calling their suggestion nonsense. How could they even think such a thing? He reminded them that the arrangement was his and they shouldn't make any fuss about it. Nini told him that the number of apprentices would determine their participation in the mage meeting. If the number of apprentices exceeded 5, they would have to participate in the fierce team competition. Terry added that the new apprentices' abilities were quite concerning. Lorenzo replied that victory or defeat was up to fate, and all they could do was their best. He knew what he had to do and told them to leave his presence. Cumberland was in the Mistwood Forest, reflecting that using one's own internal magic to activate the fire element, ignite the wooden pillars, and cast the magic was impossible. In that lifetime, he could never cast spells. However, there was a way to harness the fire element within the body. He recalled the evening before the last day when Gia had privately given him a book on the Mistwood Forest as compensation from the school for attempting to tempt him into cheating. Cumberland read the information in the book, which seemed to focus on the fire cave. The scene shifted to an owl approaching the headmaster carrying a scroll. The owl announced there was a message from the Mage Association for Grand Magus Ozapaku. The headmaster wondered if it was an intercontinental message. The scroll opened like a portal, revealing the afterimage of a lady who addressed the headmaster as Osuru. She asked if he still remembered their 7-year agreement. He commented that she was still as beautiful as ever. As evening fell, Isabella waited for Kunlun, and Yuji asked a man if Kunlun had returned, noting that it was already sunset. The man replied that it seemed Kunlun's words about preparing were just an excuse. He was likely retreating empty-handed after realizing the difficulty. Yuji remarked that young people were always so concerned about their reputation. News soon reached both Yuji and Lorenzo. The students were shocked by something they saw and wondered if it was an invasion by a beast. They debated whether they should notify the teachers, but then they realized it was Kunlun, who now resembled a beast, telling them to step aside as he needed to go to the training ground. They were confused, wondering if it was really him and what he was even saying. Isabella approached him deeply worried, but Lorenzo stopped her, noting that the aura of the fire core around Kunlun was incredibly strong and his current state was extremely unstable. He warned that provoking him rashly could cost someone their life. Kunlun insisted on taking his test, and Lorenzo asked what he had done to himself. Kunlun then recalled his conversation with Ajax, who had been shocked and asked if he was an idiot. Ajax explained that the fire core could only be used for forcing and swallowing. It would only lead to an explosion. Lorenzo wondered if Kunlun had been foolish enough to swallow the fire core. Cumberland mentioned that he was ready to use the magic power within him to ignite the wooden stakes. Lorenzo acknowledged this and watched as Cumberland unleashed the fire from his fist. Everyone watched in anticipation. At first, the fire didn't catch on the log, but eventually ignited, leaving everyone, students and Yuji included, shocked. Cumberland collapsed afterwards, stating that it was done. Lorenzo immediately went to treat Cumberland and instructed Terry to take him to the infirmary and inform Azinka to come. Isabella arrived asking about Cumberland's condition. Lorenzo replied that Cumberland had survived for the time being, but it was best not to move him too roughly. He cautioned her to be careful of any potential explosions. Isabella, tearful, nodded. Lorenzo then called Minnie and asked her to tidy up a room in the Mage Tower dormitory. She agreed and left to carry out the task. Yuji closed the curtains of his office, remarking that from this moment forward, Cumberland's status as the top student at the academy would no longer be in question. The others agreed. Yuji reflected that perhaps the principles he had held onto weren't as perfect as he had once believed. As the two others left, one asked the other for his take on the matter. The second one wondered how he saw it, noting that rumors said Cumberland was severely burned. He had a potion that could soothe and heal it, so he would send it over. He thought that someone so cruel to himself, now that he had made a breakthrough, should be upset further. The first man remarked that Cumberland truly lived up to his reputation as a high-ranked mage. The scene shifted to the headmaster, who was speaking with a lady through the portal. She asked him to train his apprentices well and was confident that now the Ironwood Academy was destined to win the expedition. He replied, telling her to wait and see. The apprentice test finally came to an end. Cumberland woke up in a room, and Nini remarked that he had finally regained consciousness. She asked how he was feeling. Cumberland wondered where he was. Nini informed him that he was in his room. He saw Isabella sleeping next to him, sitting and holding his finger. Terry explained that Isabella had stayed awake for 2 nights in a row, keeping watch over him, and finally couldn't stay awake any longer. Cumberland acknowledged how hard Isabella had worked. Then he wondered if he had passed the test. Terry confirmed it and congratulated him, saying he had become the 5th disciple of Master Lorenzo. Nini introduced herself as the 2nd eldest senior, while Terry introduced herself as the 4th apprentice. Cumberland greeted them both. Terry told him he should call them by name and suggested they tell the teacher that he was awake. Just then, the eldest apprentice arrived and asked if they knew Cumberland's whereabouts. Cumberland remarked that he was the one who didn't know his limits. The boy retorted that Cumberland was quite audacious. Cumberland replied that he wasn't audacious enough and asked the boy if he had a problem with that. Angered, the boy was about to react when Minnie stepped in and told him to calm down. She then introduced him as Eisenberg, their senior. Eisenberg shouted that there was no need to stop him, insisting that there were some things Cumberland needed to know. He then demanded whether Cumberland realized how much trouble he had caused the teachers by seizing that apprentice spot. Nini interjected, saying that Mastermind had already declared the matter closed for discussion. However, Cumberland insisted on hearing Eisenberg out, wondering if his acceptance had caused any trouble for their teacher. Terry then explained that from Cumberland's perspective, he was innocent. However, his presence had clearly been exploited by certain individuals who sought to undermine the teacher. This was especially significant because it would determine how they participated in that year's Mage Tower competition. The Mage Tower competition was organized by the Mage Association, a brutal contest among the 4 major academies where they competed for control of the Mage Towers. Apprentices of the Mags took part in this event, and the results determined whether a Mage Tower would be promoted or demoted. If the number of disciples was fewer than 5, they would be protected by relevant regulations and could avoid the competition. However, due to Cumberland's involvement, the current situation had become extremely unfavorable for them. Cumberland remarked if he was understanding correctly, the competition could both bring glory to the academy and upgrade the Mage Tower, so wasn't that great? Eisenberg glared at him, asking if Cumberland knew anything about their teacher. They had to protect the Mage Tower and they couldn't afford to lose it under any circumstances. Nini intervened, asking Eisenberg to calm down as Cumberland had just recovered from serious injuries. Eisenberg then implied that Cumberland was nothing and needed to grow up. As apprentices, their goal was to bring glory to the academy and upgrade the Mage Tower. How could they avoid battles and be so spineless? It was pathetic. He blamed Cumberland for their predicament, saying it was his involvement that had put them in this position. Cumberland now understood and referred to Eisenberg as the weak one who was holding everyone back. Eisenberg was shocked and enraged, ready to strike Cumberland. But Terry and Nene stepped in, trying to calm him down, reminding him that Cumberland was still badly injured. Terry cautioned Eisenberg, saying, "Don't forget the apprentice code." Eisenberg agreed his thoughts on the fact that Cumberland had nearly pushed him to break the apprentice code. Fighting inside the Mage Tower was strictly forbidden. He called Cumberland a coward, telling him that if he had the guts, he should accept the challenge of a duel. Minnie told him that he couldn't do something like that as Cumberland was still severely injured. She even asked Cumberland to stay calm. However, Cumberland accepted the challenge, and Isabella seemed worried about him. Eisenberg began to leave, telling Cumberland that he had 3 days to recover and shouldn't make himself look bad by bullying the injured. He thought it would be best to use this time to force Cumberland to leave. As Eisenberg left, and he scolded Cumberland, frustrated that he was so reckless. How could he accept Eisenberg's challenge? Not to mention he have no magical talent, she said. And if he think defeating a couple of amateurs in the exam meant he could underestimate his abilities, Terry advised Cumberland to calm down and apologize to Eisenberg to resolve the situation. She only suggested this because she had seen his resilient spirit during the test. Cumberland stretched out his hand in acknowledgement but replied that the best way to resolve a misunderstanding was through actual combat. Let's go, and we'll show him the level of Lorenzo's personally trained apprentice, Cumberland declared. Nini added that Cumberland really was reckless and if didn't care about having any friends. Terry stopped him mentioning that she thought Cumberland was correct. If they can demonstrate in practice, he would have a hard time understanding. The advantage built through pure strength was only effective in low-level combat. The reason why the world worshipped mags was because at a certain stage, pure strength became useless. The scene shifted to Mustard Hill behind the academy, where Terry was standing opposite Cumberland for their practice session. She told him it would be better to lose to her than to be disabled by Eisenberg. Isabella wondered aloud if they really had to fight, given that Cumberland had only just woken up from his coma. Nini reassured her, telling her not to worry because Terry would go easy on him. Cumberland, however, told Isabella not to worry as he had already recovered enough. He thought there were some things he hadn't shared with her yet, including how his physique didn't allow him to practice magic. Terry then attacked Cumberland, urging him to watch closely. A person strong in physical strength, once encountering a mage, would be dealt with like this, she said, launching an earthbind spell at him. How would he deal with that? Cumberland disappeared from his position, getting so close to her that he nearly landed a punch. His fist was inches from her face, and he apologized, saying if that was the kind of move she just used, she would already be dead. Terry was visibly moved to tears, and both Isabella and Minnie were shocked by Cumberland's move. Cumberland stood up and said, "Don't hesitate to teach me." He thought to himself that since childhood, he had realized his physique could grow stronger as long as it endured the forging of death's brink. Nini managed to wake Terry up, and Terry was completely in shock. Nini was surprised that just one punch had been enough to make Terry lose her fighting spirit. Terry then asked if she could rest while Nene would teach Cumberland. As Cumberland thanked her, she mentioned that she had noticed a pattern. The disciples who had been defeated by him had all made similar mistakes. They had underestimated his speed and defense, and in simple terms, they were all defeated by their arrogance and prejudice. She continued flying into the sky, saying that if they had been more cautious, the outcome might have been different. Cumberland was surprised to see that she could fly. Nini went on to explain that she had already analyzed Cumberland's skills and for fairness, and to ensure he was completely convinced, she attacked him with a wind blade. The attack hit the ground beside Cumberland, but he wasn't frightened. Isabella was worried as the attack had been incredibly powerful. Nini explained that it was her specialty and that in a life-and-death duel between mags, there was no need to announce the scale of the attack. She asked if in such a situation, Cumberland still wanted to continue. Cumberland thanked her for the explanation but added that he didn't like winning without a real fight. In response to a question, he used the pressure of his fist to push against her, even tearing a small part of her sleeve with just the force. She was shocked by his words and he told her that she was already dead, having seen his strength. He then said, "Let's begin the duel." She decided to increase the distance, flying further away and stopping at a reasonable distance, thinking it should be enough. If she went any farther, her wind blade would lose effectiveness. Just then, she noticed a few stones being thrown toward her with tremendous force. She managed to dodge them, thinking she must counterattack, so she launched a wind blade barrier. However, without her noticing, Cumberland had already appeared behind her. He grabbed her head from behind and slammed it toward the ground, apologizing as he mentioned that his jumping ability was also quite impressive. She was stunned, pleading, "Don't kill him." She started crying as well. He released her, thanking her for the duel as it had greatly benefited him. Nini wondered if she was actually still alive. Isabella, relieved that everyone was okay, asked Hunland what he was writing. He replied that the magic skills were strange and mysterious, and he needed to carefully document everything to find more ways to counter magic. Nini and Isabella were both surprised by this. Terry, looking amazed, remarked that with such powerful talent, Cumberland still showed such diligence. No wonder they had been completely defeated. She asked Cumberland why he naturally possessed such strength. He replied that he was still searching for the answer, and that was one of the reasons why he had to become a mage. Nini explained that Cumberland didn't truly want to become a mage, but because the rules of the world were set by the mags, he felt he had no choice but to follow that path. Cumberland responded, acknowledging that it must be that way. However, for him, the world simply existed, and there was no room for liking or disliking it. The only thing he could do was acknowledge his flaws. He recognized his own extraordinary talent and abilities, and he would continue moving forward, overcoming obstacles and forging ahead. As they spoke, they noticed the sunlight breaking through the clouds, creating a beautiful scene. Cumberland had earned the recognition of Nini and Terry, but that was only the first step in his journey to become a formal mage apprentice. 3 days later, the scene shifted. Terry asked Nini if they should really not go and plead with Eisenberg on Cumberland's behalf. Nini replied that it wasn't necessary, as she had come to realize that it might be best for Cumberland and Eisenberg to communicate directly. Terry then asked who many thought would win between the two of them. Cumberland stood facing Eisenberg, who declared that he wouldn't hold back in their duel. If Cumberland lost, he would have to leave Master Lorenzo's tutelage. Cumberland, unshaken, asked to begin the duel, stating that he would not lose and wouldn't leave voluntarily. Eisenberg smirked, saying that he would simply have to accidentally injure Cumberland during their bout. Eisenberg activated the magic field and called out to Cumberland, telling him that he had looked into Cumberland's background and knew about the journey he had been on. However, as the chief disciple of their master, Eisenberg felt it was his duty to eliminate Cumberland as he posed a threat to the upcoming Mage Tower tournament. As Eisenberg continued, Cumberland interrupted, saying that it was enough. He had heard that Eisenberg was ranked among the top 100 apprentices in the academy. Eisenberg, pleased by the acknowledgement, asked if Cumberland was backing down now. Cumberland, unfazed, replied that while Eisenberg might not be the best apprentice, he should at least provide him with useful insight. Cumberland challenged him, saying, "Just come on and hit him with his strongest attack." Eisenberg, calling him arrogant, said he deserved nothing less than that. He then unleashed his attack using the inscribed hymn, which formed a massive circle in the sky. A tremendous surge of power was released from it, heading straight for Cumberland. After a moment of silence, Eisenberg thought to himself that it must have been a perfect hit. Didn't others say Cumberland was very agile? Did he get so scared that he forgot to dodge? Eisenberg pondered. He reflected on his harshness but believed he wasn't wrong. If anyone was to blame, it was the world itself. Cumberland, coughing and recovering from the attack, wondered aloud was that inscribed magic. The release direction was subtle and the attack itself was cleverly executed. Eisenberg was indeed stronger than any apprentice Cumberland had encountered before. The force of the strike was likely as powerful as Cumberland's full strength at the age of 14. Eisenberg was shocked to see that Cumberland had actually withstood an inscribed attack with his bare body. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster Cumberland was. Cumberland, unfazed, mentioned that if Eisenberg had any stronger spells, he shouldn't hold back. Eisenberg agreed, stating that he would treat Cumberland as an equal and fight him with respect. He muttered a few words under his breath and then unleashed the inscribed magic earth prison. A multitude of rocks appeared around Cumberland, forming a prison to capture him. Without missing a beat, Eisenberg followed up with Wind Rush, creating a powerful tornado that mixed with the rocks. He didn't stop there. He used Lightning Bolt next, causing a massive explosion. Despite the overwhelming power of the attack, Cumberland calmly remarked that he now understood Eisenberg's weakness. Eisenberg was a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Eisenberg, completely stunned by this insight, was unable to respond in time. Cumberland rushed forward to attack, but Eisenberg quickly raised a shield to defend himself. Cumberland, with a knowing look, said that he had already seen through the shield and delivered a powerful punch to break it. Eisenberg spat out blood, incredulous, and shouted that it was impossible. A physical attack should not have been able to break his shield. Without hesitation, Cumberland grabbed Eisenberg's head and slammed him into the stone behind him, shattering it into small pieces. Eisenberg was left in shock as Cumberland stood over him. Finally, Cumberland said, "Eisenberg, you've lost." Cumberland turned and said that nothing was impossible. It was only a matter of strength. Eisenberg then asked why Cumberland hadn't killed him. Cumberland replied that it was just a sparring match between fellow students and there was no need for it to be a fight to the death. Besides, if he had injured Eisenberg, they would have lost a member for the Mage Tower tournament. Eisenberg, overcome with emotion, began to cry, lamenting his loss. He wondered if Cumberland could really lead them to victory, especially given the deteriorating health of their teacher. As Cumberland began to leave, he stopped and remarked, "A real man doesn't cry just because he was hurt." Eisenberg shouted back, "These weren't tears of defeat. They are tears of excitement." Cumberland then met up with Minnie, Terry, and Isabella. Isabella, concerned, asked if Cumberland was injured. Minnie mentioned that their communications seemed to have gone well. She also added that they had come to deliver a message. The teacher was waiting for Cumberland in the study room. Cumberland agreed, and Minnie teased that Cumberland might meet someone interesting there as well. Terry added that they might get along quite well. When Cumberland arrived to meet the teacher commented that it seemed Cumberland's body had recovered well. Cumberland thanked him for his care. The teacher, however, downplayed his role, saying that using magic to heal Cumberland wasn't his doing. If you want to thank someone, so he should thank the girl. A girl greeted Cumberland, introducing herself as Asinka, the third disciple of the teacher. She asked why he had done this to himself again and whether he wanted her to heal him. Cumberland greeted her in return, explaining that the injuries were minor and there was no need for healing. He thanked her for her previous assistance, however. Asinka touched his biceps and remarked that his body was quite peculiar, feeling stronger than before. She then asked if he could give her some of his blood. The teacher, noticing the conversation, told Asinka that she could leave for now as he had some matters to discuss with Cumberland. She agreed, but before leaving, she told Cumberland to let's meet later, she could trade him some potent potions. The teacher then commented to Cumberland that it seemed he was getting along well with his classmates. He handed Cumberland a stack of notes and books specifically for him. Cumberland accepted them, and the teacher explained that although Cumberland hadn't learned conventional spells, the essence of magic lay in understanding and studying the laws of the world. Ultimately, the goal was to use that knowledge for one's own purposes. The teacher added that given Cumberland's strength, he should consider using himself as the subject of research to maximize his potential. The books contain various essential pieces of knowledge about the mage world, including methods to counteract spells and exploit their weaknesses. The teacher believed that these resources would be beneficial for Cumberland at his current stage. Cumberland mentioned that it was great because the books were exactly what he needed. The teacher replied that Cumberland's situation was quite unique, so his guidance might be limited. Cumberland, however, disagreed, saying that the teacher was the first person to treat him as a major apprentice and the first step was incredibly important to him. He promised that he would surely repay the teacher's kindness one day. The teacher acknowledged Cumberland's thoughtfulness but reminded him that his status wasn't given by him. Cumlin had earned it with his own strength and determination. He added that he was only helping Cumlin because of his sincere heart. The teacher then said that Cumlin could leave now, and if he ever needed anything, he should feel free to consult his seniors. Cumlin understood and then asked the question that had been on his mind. He said he had heard that the teacher participated in the Battle of Snow Demon Ridge 16 years ago. The teacher, surprised, asked if Cumberland was investigating his father's past. Cumberland, incredulous, replied that his father had appeared after the Battle of Snow Demon Ridge 16 years ago, and he had heard that the teacher had also been part of that battle. Finally, Lorenzo confirmed that he had indeed participated in the battle, but he explained that information about the Snow Demon Ridge was only accessible to those who had become mags. Since Cumberland wasn't one yet, he couldn't access those details. Cumberland nodded, saying it was as expected, and then left the room thinking to himself that he would become a mage as soon as possible. As Cumberland talked to Isabella about it, she wondered what the fastest way to become a mage was. He agreed, mentioning that there were many things required to become a mage and to gain access to those opportunities. Isabella remarked that he was really ambitious. She then explained the apprentice advancement regulations, noting that they required earning credits through cultivation. Only once enough credits were accumulated could they apply for the mage trial task, and that's generally how the process worked. Attending classes, completing assignments, and participating in competitions were all ways to earn credits. She had accumulated 82 credits so far, though accompanying him through recent exams had slowed her progress a bit. Cumberland asked how many credits were required to apply for the trial task. Isabella replied that it was around 1,000 credits. Cumlin was shocked to hear that. Isabella explained further, saying that compared to the mage trial task, 1,000 credits wasn't as difficult to earn. However, direct disciples like Cumlin had far more opportunities than regular disciples like them. As they passed a group of people with horns, Cumberland wondered aloud why there were so many different races on campus lately. Isabella explained that those individuals were apprentices from other academies. A man approached and excused himself before asking if Cumberland was the top disciple of that year's Reinhardt Academy. Cumberland confirmed it. The man nodded, saying it was as expected, then introduced himself as Cinder from Hemlock Magic Academy. He added that he was looking forward to facing Cumberland at the Magic Tower tournament. Eisenberg told Cumberland about the Magic Stone Crystal Core, which serves as the heart of the Magic Tower. It was also a crucial element for refining magic and creating magical items. However, high-level Magic Stone Crystal Cores were extremely rare resources. To address the distribution of these stones among mags, Mage Tower tournaments were held. To prevent conflicts within the academy during the preliminary rounds, invitations were sent to other academies for the allocation matches. The 26 teams from Hemlock Magic Academy participated, and that year, Reinhardt Academy also had 26 teams competing. Only the winning team from each of the 16 matches would advance to the official tournament and participate in the next stage of competition among the 4 major academies. He gave him the list of the 16 duels determined by a drawing of lots. As Cumberland observed, this explained why the people they encountered the previous day had tried to provoke them. Eisenberg explained that Cumberland had become the source of confidence for their team. In addition to the preliminary matches, they would need to win at least 2 more matches to secure their Tier 3 Magic Stone Tower. Cumberland mentioned that this meant they needed to win at least 3 matches, and then he wondered about the rules of the competition. Eisenberg explained that the rules for the preliminary round were straightforward. Each team had a crystal tower to defend, and the core rule of the competition was to ensure the safety of their own crystal tower while also destroying the opponent's tower. Each team would secure its tower with various protective spells, and at its core, the competition tested both magical skills and teamwork. Additionally, they had to be careful to avoid falling outside the arena as the Black Abyss was connected to teleportation arrays. Falling into it would result in immediate teleportation out in the field, leading to disqualification. Moreover, intentionally killing opponents was not allowed during the competition, and causing injury or death to an opponent could result in the loss of the match. Cumberland mentioned he had heard that participating in the competition also earned credits. Eisenberg replied that aside from the rewards from the academy, there are also tasks assigned by their Mage Tower. When combined, winning a single match could earn them 100. Cumberland decided that they should aim for first place. The scene shifted to the Magic Tower Arena, especially built for the Mage Tower competition. A large crowd had gathered, and the event was about to begin. The participants were asked to enter the arena according to the order indicated on their draw cards. Each door corresponded to an entrance for a specific match arena. Eisenberg asked the team if they were ready as it was now their turn. They all agreed. As they entered, Nini reminded them that in team battles, the coordination of each member's unique traits was crucial. She first thought about her own abilities. She was proficient in wind magic, specializing in long-range attacks, and could control flight. She excelled at disrupting and blocking opponents' attacks. Next was Terry, who specialized in earth-binding spells. He also had expertise in spiritual magic formations, which were full of inspiration. The advantage of indirect attacks was that they were unpredictable and difficult to defend against. Then came Asenka, who was skilled in healing, support magic, and potion brewing. She enjoyed body modification and was also proficient in close combat. Her special ability was shape-shifting, which gave her an edge in battle. Eisenberg was skilled in simulating various elemental attacks with runic magic. He was well-balanced in both offense and defense, capable of fighting at close and long ranges with extensive magical experience and a measured approach. Finally, there was Cumberland, who wasn't particularly skilled in magic but was an expert in physical combat. They finally reached their crystal tower, and Terry noted that it was just a simple glowing crystal. However, at the base of the tower, it could charge a protective shield. Eisenberg explained that from this point until the end of the match, they would be able to see the opponent's position. A voice then announced that both sides were entering, marking the 17th group of the preliminary matches for the Magic Tower competition, which was about to begin. The opponents for Eisenberg's team were Cinder's team, whom Cumberland had met earlier. Cinder instructed Piero to move ahead and start the battle. Piero jumped into the arena, causing shock waves on the ground as he summoned his stone golem warrior. Nini, flying high in the sky, wondered how it felt like there were more opponents than expected. Terry pointed out that it was due to summoning magic. Eisenberg quickly told the team to stick to the plan they had discussed earlier and focus on blocking the opponents on the battlefield. He instructed Terry to stay back and charge the Crystal Tower's shield with her magic. Everyone moved into position as planned. Then Cinder spoke, mentioning that summoning magic was a game-changer in team battles. Eisenberg and his three teammates entered the arena only to find a large number of golems ahead of them. Cinder apologized, saying that such a battle might not be fair. He then asked if they wanted to surrender voluntarily or face humiliation and be thrown out of the arena. Eisenberg was shocked by the sight of so many golems, while Cumberland sensed something about the distance. He stretched his body preparing himself. Cinder, noticing that they weren't surrendering, raised an eyebrow and wondered if they were truly ready to fight. Cumberland picked up a stone and asked if they were ready. Cinder wondered what Cumberland was doing and if he had decided not to surrender. He figured they would just have to wait. Cumberland readied himself to attack with a stone, and the others watched in silence. He threw the stone toward the enemies and it sailed through the air, striking all of them in quick succession. As Cinder processed what had just happened, they realized the stone had already shattered, leaving them in complete shock. The voice announced that the opposing team had been eliminated and that the Stormbreaker team had won. Even Cumberland's teammates were stunned by his actions. Terry, while maintaining the barrier, wondered what had happened having heard the announcement. Cumberland, however, was pleased with himself, having secured 100 credits. It didn't seem that troublesome to him. Cinder, still in disbelief, asked Cumberland how this was possible, refusing to accept the outcome. In response, he summoned the Stone Golem fusion, declaring that they would now kill them regardless of the rules. Eisenberg immediately prepared for defense as the golem charged toward Cumberland, but Cumberland delivered a brutal punch, shattering the golem into small pieces, leaving everyone stunned by the display of power. Cumberland, with a confident smirk, explained that his fist was reserved for dealing with disobedience. He then turned to Asenka and instructed her to take care of the rest. Asenka, completely taken aback by this, was left in shock. Later, Asenka healed the enemy, thinking as a healer that it was her duty to do her best to save him, ensuring her team wouldn't be disqualified. The man thanked her, saying he was counting on her. She explained that there was one body part she couldn't save as it had been completely shattered, but keeping him alive was the best she could do. The man expressed his gratitude. That night, as Cumberland and the others gathered in a room to discuss their performance, Eisenberg remarked that they had come very close to being disqualified in their first match. Cumberland responded that he would definitely be more careful next time. Terry suggested that given Cumberland's terrifying combat abilities, they would need to adjust their strategy moving forward. Isabella was a bit jealous of the direct disciples who could earn more credits in a day than normal disciples like her. Cumberland reassured her that once the competition was over, he would help her earn some credits. She asked if he was serious, and he agreed, saying that as his fiancé, if he wouldn't help her, then who would? She wished him a long life. Eisenberg then suggested they end the session and get some rest. They had passed their first match unscathed, but unbeknownst to them, their actions had stirred up a storm of jealousy among others. Elsewhere, a man enraged slammed his fist into the wall, furious. He muttered that no matter what, they had been invited to participate in the competition, and those people had won the match, even going so low as humiliate them. It was unbearable. He turned to Mollard, demanding weren't he going to stand up for them. Mollard replied calmly that they represent the dignity of the entire academy, so he mustn't act rashly. And he have investigated this situation, and it was our people who started it. Verily, his temper rising responded that it's enough. Bowing our heads in submission won't earn they any respect. In the next match, he will personally reclaim the honor of our academy. The second round of the Mage Tower tournament takes place in the Mage Tower dungeon, and the rules were essentially the same as the first match: protect their own crystal and destroy his opponents. However, the middle passage has transformed into a complex maze. Cumberland remarked that this change sounded quite troublesome, as he could no longer simply charge for the win. Eisenberg informed him that he had heard some news. The team originally scheduled to face them had suddenly chosen to forfeit, and Hemlock Magic Academy had replaced them with another team. It was clear that they were targeting Cumberland. Cumberland acknowledged this, promising to remain cautious. Eisenberg explained that there were multiple entrances to the chamber, and according to the pre-match analysis, they should prioritize defense. 3 members of the team would stay behind to guard the Crystal Tower, while the other 2 would explore the maze and gather information. He noted that Cumberland had the strongest combat abilities in the team, and Azinka's soul imprint would be especially effective in navigating the maze's terrain, so they would be the ones to explore. Both Cumberland and Azinka agreed, and without further hesitation, they left. On the other side, in Hemlock Magic Academy's crystal chamber, Verily sat alone with the stone when someone emerged from the wall, announcing that they had located the enemy. Verily acknowledged this with appreciation, telling the individual to start the match. He added that he wanted more than just a win. He wanted to make them pay the price they deserved. The person left understanding his intent. Meanwhile, as Cumberland and Azinka made their way through the maze, she asked if he had considered her previous proposal. Cumberland wondered what she was referring to. She clarified that if he gave her a small amount of his blood, she could provide him with some incredibly powerful potions. Just 400 milliliters would suffice. Cumberland was curious about what she meant by amazing. Azinka explained that her specialty was brewing potions, particularly those tailored for blood donors. Some could enhance magical power, even though Cumberland probably didn't need that one, while others could induce temporary death, alter magical properties, or even permanently change one's appearance. Cumberland coughed awkwardly, saying that none of those seemed particularly useful to him. However, if his blood could help her, he would gladly offer some after the match. Azinka smiled, pleased by his generosity. She reassured him, saying to no worry as she won't let him down. As they continued, a thick mist began to fill the chamber. Azinka immediately covered her nose, remarking that it seemed suspicious. She then advised Cumberland to cover his nose and mouth as well. 2 men appeared, one riding a spirit, and they both warned the duo slow down. Cumberland realized too late what was happening. The mist was disabling everyone's magical abilities. The first man was Shafarnir, the goblin prince who specialized in poison magic and could control the poisonous mist. The second man was Theodore, an insect mage, a member of a terrifying family known for raising insect monsters using their own souls. Azinka quickly told Cumberland that they needed to leave the area. However, Cumberland was already charging at Theodore, who was sitting atop an insect. He remarked, "It's like a mantis trying to stop a chariot." He then ordered his insect to kill Cumberland. Cumberland struck the insect with such force that it was knocked back, and Theodore spat up blood. Schaefer, watching the exchange, was stunned. He couldn't understand how Cumberland had managed such a feat and what kind of magic it was. Cumberland taunted him, saying, "Think it over slowly after he wake up." As Schaefer collapsed, Cumberland wondered how the Goblin Prince had been defeated so easily, especially since he hadn't even struck him. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared behind Azinka and grabbed her, pulling her into the ground with a mysterious power. The figure mocked Cumberland, praising his skill. Cumberland was immediately concerned for Azinka, realizing that the cunning and unpredictability of magic made it difficult to defend against. Cumberland could hear Azinka's breathing and the faint sounds of movement against the walls. He struck the wall in the direction of the noise, then continued hammering at it. Meanwhile, a shadowy figure continued dragging Azinka away, telling her to relax. Since he hadn't killed her opponent, they could do whatever they wanted. Suddenly, Cumberland broke through the wall ahead of the shadowy figure, declaring that he found him. The man's eyes widened in fear. Panicked, he warned Cumberland not to come any closer or he would kill Azinka. Before he could act, Azinka transformed into a wild boar and let out a fierce roar. Then with incredible force, she charged into the shadowy figure, sending him tumbling to the ground. Everyone, including Kunlun, was caught off guard by the sudden transformation. Realizing he was at a disadvantage, the shadowy figure decided to flee. He turned to sink into the ground, but before he could escape, Cumberland lunged forward demanding where he think he was going. He swung his fist, aiming to land a powerful strike. The shadowy figure was badly injured, and Cumberland asked him if he really think he could pull the same trick on him again. Azinka let out a roar and then returned to her normal form, adjusting her clothes carefully. She apologized to Cumberland, feeling embarrassed for the way she had transformed in front of him, explaining that the skill had caused some damage to her clothes. Cumberland understood, admitting he often found himself in similar situations. Just then, Nini arrived, looking severely injured. She told them that their crystal tower was under attack, and the enemies had managed to come up from behind. She urged them to follow her. Cumberland stopped Azinka, telling her to wait as he would go alone. He then asked Nini who had injured her, suggesting she might want to prepare herself first. Nini dismissed it as nothing serious but insisted they had to hurry. Frustrated, Cumberland punched her, sending her crashing into the wall. Azinka gasped in shock. Cumberland simply muttered it was a trivial skill. That person had the audacity to show off. Suddenly, the enemy revealed their true form. Yuji, a member of Hemlock Magic Academy who specialized in illusions, illusion rays, and mental manipulation. Yuji asked Kunlun how he had seen through his tricks. Kunlun smirked. Yuji made a lot of mistakes and he was at a loss for words. Besides, even if he had succeeded, there's always someone there to cover for him. Yuji scowled, calling Kunlun an idiot until he knew it was a trap and still followed, and if he have a death wish. Cumberland found himself trapped in the illusion array, and he could hear someone laughing mockingly, suggesting that Cumberland only relied on brute strength. On the outside of the illusion, Azinka, separated by a barrier, desperately called out for him to wake up, warning him that it was a trap. Yankee, stepping closer, gently touched Cumberland's face, sneering as she remarked that Cumberland was tough on the outside but completely defenseless against mental magic. She laughed, saying, "Let's see what's hidden deep within his heart." I think I continued to plead, urging Kunlun to wake up. Meanwhile, Yanxi effortlessly invaded Kunlun's mind, where she discovered a woman apologizing to him and a man engaged in battle. Yanxi was intrigued, wondering what else lay hidden in the depths of Kunlun's subconscious. Then she saw something strange, a tower. As she investigated further, she was startled by the sound of something moving. To her horror, a giant snake appeared before her, sending her into a panic. She quickly retreated, breaking the barrier between Isengut and Cumberland in the process, still trembling from the encounter with the creature. Cumberland woke up, confused and disoriented. Azinka rushed to him, asking if he was all right. He wondered why it happened. She smiled in relief, telling him it was just good to see he was fine. At that moment, Verily approached, stepping on Yankee's leg. Yankee, still shaken by the monstrous snake, looked terrified. Verily sneered, saying he was all a bunch of fools. He couldn't even do a proper reconnaissance. He then kicked Yankee back and leaped toward Cumberland, shouting that he would reclaim the dignity of Hemlock Academy himself. He vowed to show Cumberland the true power of their strongest battle magic as he unleashed the Holy Light Battle Fist. The attack landed directly on Cumberland's face. Isenka gasped in worry, but Verily's expression grew colder as he watched Cumberland take the blow. He scoffed and said, "Someone who doesn't even respect their comrades has no right to talk about dignity." He then taunted, "Was that the strongest strike?" Verily's hand recoiled with pressure as Cumberland launched his counterattack using 50% of his strength. Verily was taken aback by the force of the strike, but then he was hit, crashing into the wall. Isenka watched in surprise as Cumberland stood tall and said, "Anyone who disrespects their comrades earns my contempt." He then apologized to Isenka, acknowledging that he'd caused her trouble. The announcement rang out declaring that the Hemlock Academy team had been eliminated and Lyrian Heights Academy was the winner. Eisenberg and the others were stunned with Eisenberg telling Kunlun and Isenka that they had successfully completed the scout mission. They had finally passed the second trial. The news reached Melo, who was surprised to hear that his teammates had been wiped out. As he read the report, he muttered to himself that it seemed they had hit a wall. He wondered if Team Geese was up next to face Cumberland's team. The man standing in front of him agreed with that assessment. Molu then instructed the man to have Team Geese forfeit the match, stating that there was no need for unnecessary sacrifices. He would love to fight them, he said, but not here. Lorenzo praised his disciples for making it to the top 16, expressing how sincerely proud he was of them. He told them that as their teacher, if their goal had been to simply guard the third-level Mage Tower, they had already succeeded. Eisenberg, however, pointed out that they were determined to continue competing and aimed to win the higher-level Magic Tower's crystal core. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Many added that it was rare to earn credits just by swinging their fists, emphasizing the importance of what they were pursuing. Lorenzo asked if that was truly what they all thought. He warned them that, to be honest, after reaching the top 16, the battles would become extremely dangerous. They reassured him not to worry, explaining that it was their collective decision, and each of them had their own reasons for continuing the fight. The scene then shifted to a memory from the second battle review meeting where the other four bowed to Cumberland, asking him to accept their request. Cumberland wondered what kind of scheme they were up to. He recalled his secret. He had learned from Eisenberg about teacher Lorenzo 16 years ago during the Snow Devil Ridge battle. Lorenzo had used a moonlight-level spell far beyond his rank. Thanks to his efforts, many mags' lives were saved, and the Academy rewarded him with the position of overseeing the third-level Mage Tower. However, due to that battle, his magical foundation had been severely damaged, and his path to further magical advancement had been cut off. Over time, his achievements were forgotten, and some even secretly ridiculed him as a crippled mage. Eisenberg further explained that Lorenzo's condition was not incurable. As Cumberland guessed, Nini added that if they could win the Magic Tower tournament, they would have the opportunity to choose a Moonlight-level reward, which might allow them to heal their teacher's magical injury. Terry remarked that it was an extravagant hope, one they had never dared to even consider before. Isinger, however, added that with Cumberland now on their side, they could see a glimmer of hope. They all rallied together, asking Cumberland to lead them to victory in the Magic Tower tournament. Cumberland smiled and replied, he thought this would be difficult, but winning the Magic Tower tournament has always been my plan. With that, they all boarded a flying ship, embarking on their journey to the Magic Tower tournament. The top 16 matches would take place at the junction of the four major academies' territories, specifically in the sacred plains of Fairstead. Isabella was also with them, and she turned to Cumberland, reminding him to be cautious as they neared the sky-reaching Divine Free. She had been invited as the team manager and was excited about earning credits while traveling with them. Cumberland, equally excited, looked forward to reaching first. And with that, his adventure story began to unfold.